lounging, son.
Welcome back to the Comic Lounge. My name's Ryan, and today I'm going to be talking about a book that I had been anticipating from the minute it was announced. I'm talking about I Am Stan, graphic biography of the legendary Stan Lee by none other than Mr. Tom Scioli. I first discovered his stuff through the Kayfabe channel a few years back. Been a fan ever since, picked up anything I could get from him. Loved the Jack Kirby book that he did. I have a video of that on here as well. I've interviewed Tom a couple times. We discussed the Kirby book that he did, and we did another one talking about this project as well, and it was cool to kind of unpack with him, but I still want to give, my thoughts on the book. I'll do a quick little flip through some of the things that stood out to me. I'll leave some of it, this book did just come out this week, so I don't want to spoil too much. I want everybody to kind of be able to experience it for themselves, but I didn't want to go too long without talking about the book because I did really like this. I think fits perfectly right next to the Kirby book. And right off the top, this book hooked me immediately. It has, Stan signing stuff. You're hearing the people in line, hey, great to meet you. I'm your biggest fan. And you see the person standing behind Stan. And he says Stan Lee, like very slowly. Then you continue to look down the panels. Now he's spelling out Stan's name. I don't know how many of you that are watching this have met Stan Lee or at least at this point of Stan's life towards, like the end of when he would do signings. But this was my one and only interaction with Stan, at least up close. Almost exactly the way it went. But the only difference is he didn't even really look up. He didn't respond when you said something to him. And it was almost like a factory conveyor belt, one person handing the book to the next person, and finally giving it to Stan, telling him what to sign, where to sign it, and then giving it to the next person, and then that person gives you your item, and you're on your way. No pictures, no nothing. My experience at the time, I was kind of upset, but then more reflection, I'm like, man, he doesn't even seem like he's happy to be here. That's not the Stan Lee that we all know and love. And so getting to see this in the book, having it be the cold opening, just hit me, right in the gut. And I knew from there on, I'm like, okay, this is going to be a great book. And then you flip and you see Stan's eyes, and he's just like, it just slowly, losing focus and dimming. It was very heart-wrenching to see him at the end because kind of for me, it had the feelings of the people were just using him so that they could make money off of his name. But, that's, I don't have facts. This is just my opinion. It's just what I felt. So real quick, just, to note something that Tom puts in the beginning of the book. It's, adapted from a number of sources, including interviews given throughout Stan's life. There's differences of opinion and other points of view about the events depicted in this work. And it's not approved or endorsed by Stan or any of his family, estate, Marvel, any of that. Obviously, since I've talked to Tom, I've got a little insight into his thought process and what he wanted to have in here, what he wanted to omit. And I think this is great. It's a little bit different artistically than the Kirby book. It definitely feels different. I have my own opinions of Stan. I think some of us, our opinions maybe have changed a little bit, based on not just the Kirby book where we saw some of Stan's actions, but, a lot of stuff has come to light. A lot of things that, when we're younger and we see Stan, he's the face of Marvel and like, oh man, he's this, he's created everything. I mean, I was guilty of it too. I'm like, oh, Stan Lee created all those characters. But no, it was Stan Lee, it was Jack Kirby, it was Steve Ditko, and so many countless other artists that worked with him that helped bring those stories to life. And you learn that as you get older, but you hear some of the things that, maybe Stan's not this perfect guy that we all think he is. And, he's human. He's just like every one of us. And he's not without flaws. And, this book definitely showcases that throughout. And we start on this game show where it's like, my name is Stan Lee, my name is Stan Lee, is that your real name? And stuff like that. And I love this too, because it's like a lot of people are like, how did he get hair all of a sudden? And that's another thing where he's very, he's all about his vanity. He wants to look the part. So it's like, what if I just go back to the regular old me? And he's like, now puts the wig back on. And, you talk about, first writing job he had was, and he was hired by the news service to write. And you see how his hair, like, it's kind of balding. It starts to come back. But then it's like this, full head of hair. And then it's like this. And still, even at the end of his days, his hair is still more than that. So I thought that was kind of funny the way he depicts it, because, I didn't like really pay attention to it by looking at old books or looking at old interviews or anything like that. It just didn't connect with me that he was wearing a toupee and a hairpiece. So I thought that was interesting for Tom to kind of like get that out of the way and show that. And now, we're getting a little bit of his childhood. Some stuff, I learned a little bit about it when I was reading some of his biographies, because it's they have Excelsior, The Amazing Life of Stan Lee, that Colleen Duran illustrated. We also have the book that came out, I think it was last year, kind of unpacked some stuff about Stan that we didn't maybe all know, and I definitely learned some stuff in that. But I definitely tried to go into this with an open mind of each time I look at one of these, it's like, unless you're getting it straight from the person's mouth, and well, in Stan's case, maybe you're not always getting the truth. Everybody's going to have their own difference of opinion, right? Everybody's going to come at it from a different angle. And I love the fact that, everybody knows what a big fan of Jack Kirby Tom Scioli is. But he comes into this and he's not one way or the other. And I think that that's important. You need to try to keep your own opinion as much as you can out of something like this when you're putting together a book about somebody's life, right? Like, you can't force your opinion. You want to be able to tell a story where it is honest, but also putting a little bit of yourself into it as well, especially when you're doing one that's illustrated. So you're seeing Stan, he said he's into comics. He's not into comic books. He definitely wants to write, and we see a lot of that. But we also see that, he's dishonest with stuff. He'll say that he won something and he didn't really win, like writing awards. And right here, he's, office boy, where are our sandwiches? And he's sitting there organizing papers. And even here, like, where he's saying he's getting a job as a writer, but what is he doing? He's writing obituaries, and for the names on that list. I thought this was interesting too. He's like, Judy Garland, she died? No, but we need obituaries for famous people ready to go just in case. I thought that was kind of weird, but I mean, I guess. And then this is where he's gonna come work for their cousin Martin's company, Martin Goodman. I love this too, the scratch of working at the drawing board, and we see Joe Simon and Jack Kirby hard at work getting those comics out, before it became Marvel Comics. So this is the early days, and this is where Stanley is going to get his first kind of job writing a short prose story with Captain America for the comic books. They need something to fill in there, and he doesn't sign it his name, Stanley Lieber. He signs it Stan Lee. So he uses a pen name when he's doing it, and he's often said that he did that because he didn't want to he still wanted to be a real writer, and he wanted to be able to use his name, and he didn't want it attached to comics. I think I've heard that somewhere. I mean, again, there's so many different conflicting stories, especially coming from Stan. Like, if you look at his interviews, and even in here, he'll say one thing at one point in his life, and then he changes it later. And it's a constant flip-flop to where, like, well, what is the truth? And this book really kind of leans into that. And this is where you kind of see a little bit of a douchebag side to Stan Lee, because he hears about Joe Simon and Jack Kirby moonlighting at other companies. He tells Martin, and fire him. They fire him, dude. And he could have kept his mouth shut. They even said, just keep it between us, but he doesn't. Before you go, you still have to finish that issue of Captain America. So it was a different time back then. Like nowadays you see writers, artists, like, working for both companies unless they have exclusive contract, but those exclusive contracts didn't exist back then, so it was just, and it's not like that he got paid a lot, and the comic book creators still don't get paid a lot. So, you got to do what you have to do to, take care of your family. And I think that it was kind of a shit move on Stan's part for doing that. And so now they got to find other people to keep the line moving. Stanley obviously is going to take some some writing going along for that. He goes to the army and he doesn't even have to go to Europe. This is, he stays home and he want them to write for Uncle Sam, as they say. So he's writing a lot of the training films, literature, and stuff like that. So he doesn't even have to travel abroad. So he's continuing his writing, and while he's doing it, he's also writing comic book scripts, which is kind of crazy to think about. He's doing one job, but he's not too far from the other. Constantly getting his work assignments, but what does he do? He didn't want to wait till tomorrow. He wanted to get a jump on it. He breaks into his mailbox, but he gets in trouble because it's still against the law, even though it's his mail. He's breaking into federal property. So he's waiting for his writing assignment. That doesn't really make them too happy that that's what he's doing. The soldier that comes in and talks to him makes a good point. He's like, you guys your age are getting shot at in Europe and Asia. Your life has barely changed from your civilian life. Forget the side job, stop breaking mailboxes, and get back to work. So he comes back to Timely, and he's ready to jump back in. And, I think at this point, the superhero comic books were starting to kind of wane. So, and they're looking at National, which was DC Comics at the time. They also changed their name. And they're, trying to compete with them. So, and that's something that you'll see too throughout. I mean, especially I don't think it's as prominent now, but Marvel and DC were definitely always competing with each other. And even here, look, they're like, oh, you're a writer. What do you write? Oh, for children. Oh, children's books. Love that. No, they're really periodicals. Oh, magazines, highlights for children. No, comic books. And so comic books were really looked down upon. Not anything like they are today. And this is a pivotal moment in his life. He meets Joan, but she is married and eventually gets annulled, which I didn't know this either, and comes back to him. And then, they start their long relationship. I mean, they were together, man, I would say over 50 years easily, at least, before she passed. And he passed, I think, 2-3 years after. But, now he's basically found the love of his life. And, this is kind of the way that they're showing him whipping the artist. I doubt that was really happening. Maybe it did. I don't know. I feel like that's pretty crazy if he's doing that. I mean, keep those pencils moving, draw faster, you scurvy dogs. I'm sure he could be considered a little bit of a tyrant. I mean, just based on the stories that we've heard. And again, there's moments in here where I thought we agreed I could have my pages back, and he just draws 2 lines. Here you go. Horrible. I mean, you hear so many horror stories of these artists that didn't get to keep their work, and maybe at the time they weren't worth anything, but man, some of those, if those pages existed now, so much money they'd be worth. So, and then here we go. This is where we're seeing he's combing his hair, and you can see the hair loss is starting. Again, I didn't know this, talking about the different trends that were going on in comic books, horror comics, and were starting to be big, and that's where the industry was moving, with EC and changing it to Captain America's Weird Tales. I'm definitely going to have to double check to see, but I don't ever remember that. And have a meeting between Stan and Steve Ditko for the first time, and, it's we'll keep in touch. Little does Stan know at that time that they're going to create one of the best comic book creators of all time. Another sad moment. So there's so much up and down for Stan. He did not have the perfect life. I mean, they lose their baby here and they want to adopt, but they get told they're going to be put on the waiting list. So it's one thing after another with him. And then we see just trying to stay on top of all these different trends, okay, well, Gunsmoke is popular. Let's do change the name of Black Rider Gunsmoke Western. Dennis the Menace is good. We'll do Melvin the Monster. Casper the Friendly Ghost, Homer the Happy Ghost. Sergeant Bilko, Sergeant Barney Barker. Fu Manchu, Coming of the Yellow Claw. So just constantly trying to stay on top of everything. And you just see so much. It's funny because Stan is such a talker, such a writer. And I think that is depicted so much. He's constantly, there's so much dialogue taking up the space to where it pushes other people out, and you'll see that in certain conversations where it'll look like he's overpowering conversations, and you'll see it, to me at least, it's depicted in the way the walls of text will kind of push things over. Kirby's coming back. They're not, Joe and Jack aren't partners anymore. They sold their business. National keeps him busy, but not as busy as he used to be. So now they're going to come together and they are going to do something. And this is the pivotal moment too. Like he's middle-aged, still writing comic books. Comics division's going to get shut down by Martin. He knows he'll be out of a job. So, Joan, famous story. Joan's like, well, it's your golden opportunity. You've always talked about wanting to write sophisticated comics for a grown-up audience. Do it your way. What do you have to lose? We see amazing adult fantasy. Obviously, that is gonna, house the Spider-Man book with issue 15. But they talk about the popularity of Justice League of America and doing a superhero team book. So this is the birth of Fantastic Four. And we see the back and forth. Jack's working at his drawing board. Stan's typing up that script. And look, this is it. Get this. Marvel Comics. Our first comic book was called that, and now the first superhero comic we've done in a while. It's a new imprint for a new start. And it's the birth of, look at it. And then it's one hit after another. Then they do Incredible Hulk. Then they do Thor. Ant-Man. Everything's hitting. Iron Man. And, they were going to do Spider-Man. Jack was supposed to maybe work on it. It wasn't working. And it looked, as Stan said, it looked too much like The Fly, which was what Kirby did over at Archie Comics. So they change it, and obviously, history is what it is. Ditko does his design of Spider-Man, and it blows up. The X-Men. I love these old corner boxes, too, from the 60s. Those are so great. But yeah, it's one hit after another. Doctor Strange. And we see Roy Thomas coming over. He was an assistant editor at DC. Now he's going to come work for Stan. Get the creation of Daredevil here. Wally Wood comes in and starts working on the book, and that's when everything changes for that book. So the Voices of Marvel, the Merry Marvel Marching Society, the fan club and stuff like that. And again, he just constantly burning candlestick at both ends. I love this little scene too with John Buscema here, because he talks about, he's like, so is this how you do it now? We just talk out the story? He's like, yeah, it depends on how much time I have. Sometimes I type up a paragraph or two for the beginning of the story, paragraph or two, blah, 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 stuff like that. So it's like, the Marvel method of comic book creation where really the artist is doing the majority of the storytelling and Stan is just, not to take anything away, but that he just comes in and scripts. But, when you're letting the artist completely pace the story, they're really telling the story completely visually. I would say they're taking on the heavier load. Definitely, without a doubt. This was another great one, when John Romita comes in and starts drawing Spider-Man because Steve Ditko's, just quit. And Stan doesn't even want to care to bring him back. He just finds somebody else to take over the book. John Romita Sr.'s kind of hesitant. But what he did with that book, man, amazing. I mean, this panel is probably one of the most famous panels in comic books, definitely in Spider-Man history. Face the Tiger, you just hit the jackpot. And, he goes on to have a great run. Again, this is, look, now he's wearing the toupee because he cares more about how he looks. And he, wants this public perception because, a lot of the fans for Marvel comic books were definitely a little bit older, a little bit more mature, college students were reading it, so it definitely was not being looked upon as just for a young audience anymore. They were written differently. There's a different vibe to those early Marvel stuff than if you compare it to the DC stuff that was coming out at the time. This is what I was talking about into where he just takes over conversations. All of these word balloons are Stan's, except for 1, 2, and 3. All of that text is coming out of him, as he's doing this Stan Lee show. So Stan always had aspirations. He wanted to do film and television, and eventually he's gonna, move to LA. I don't want to ruin too much more of the book. I know I've gotten kind of deep into it, so I'll just kind of give a few more things, noteworthy things. But eventually he moves to LA, and we all know what happens from there. He's always guest starring and stuff, and he narrated the Spider-Man animated show. I love this too. This when Jack, had left Marvel and he put in this character in Mr. Miracle called Funky Flashman, clearly mocking Stan Lee. And he's like, never could have imagined he could be so mean. And now we get what will become the iconic look of Stan Lee, because he shaves off that beard, goes straight to the mustache. And this is always how I see Stan Lee. Definitely, obviously, he was completely white-haired when I was first starting comic books, but this image with him with these, red shade glasses, that's like the way I've always perceived Stan. I love the little call out to the Japanese Spider-Man. And yeah, this is where Stan's gonna, set up a TV and film production office in California, and he doesn't look back. And he eventually just becomes like a lifetime Marvel employee, and he just gets a salary every year, I believe, until he passed. I don't think it ever goes away. This fucking famous photo that he took, mimicking the Tom Selleck, or mimicking the Burt Reynolds photo. That was just very, his ego it continues to just grow leaps and bounds. Maybe not depicted so much here, but there is always this constant of, maybe inside not always feeling good enough, never fully satisfied. He even talks about loving comics as a kid, and that's not true, but this is what his career became, so he kind of jumped into it, and he was almost a caricature of himself. He became a character. He had to play that character of Stan Lee every time he was out and about. I don't think that the things he said were ingenuine. I think some of the, he the Stan soapbox that he would do, those editorials, I don't believe he was a bad person. I believe that he didn't do great things sometimes, but I don't think that made him a horrible person. I definitely don't think we have Marvel. If you take Stan Lee out of the equation, there's no Marvel comic books. I think that he was just an integral of a part as, the rest of the creators that helped to bring those creations to life. Although I wish the public gave more acknowledgement, especially to a Jack Kirby, especially to a Steve Ditko. But again, they weren't as face front with their fans. They didn't really want to do a bunch of interviews, Stan. So that's how Stan was kind of able to overpower their contributions, not maybe purposely, but just to the masses, in interviews, he was the face of it. I love that they have a little interaction with Jack and Stan as Stan's, doing this interview, and Jack has, called in, and, they go back and forth, and Jack calls him out on some stuff. I love this too, this interaction with Bob Kane, who's also... There's some stories about Bob Kane. I don't know enough about him to comment on him, but I know he's not exactly the best person, Definitely kind of try to take more creator credit than he should have as well. We have this, this video series that they did with comic book creators, and we got Rob Liefeld and Todd McFarlane with Stan Lee. And again, this is how I was talking about, how he overpowers, and you can see, the way I see it is he's talking, right? And now Rob is completely covered up by that word balloon, and he's still covered up. And then now it's encroaching on Todd. So just completely taking so much credit for everything back then. I love this too. We get when he's going to guest star in The Mallrats, we have Kevin Smith. We got Jason Lee right there, which was such a great scene. And still one of my favorite movies. And then this is the later stages, when he starts his own company, and we see a little bit of shady dealings, people kind of using him. Some of the cameos he did in the films later in life, the Spider-Man musical. And just I love that, we get some great speeches here as well. He's a guest star on Larry King. He even played Larry King in one of the Marvel movies, which is kind of funny. See him get his his handprints on the Walk of Fame. And then this is just I don't know how true this is, but them taking his blood and then having special collector's items signed with ink and his DNA. I'll let you guys read it for yourselves, but just some really sad things. And even towards the end, as we get to this, and he closes his eyes, and that's how we end the book. And I love this, all the sightings of the interviews and stuff that Tom Scioli picked apart, books that he used to kind of, and other references to kind of compile together and put this book together. But it was fantastic. I don't think I need to sell this book too much. if you're a comic book fan, like, this is a must-have in your collection, especially if you have the Jack Kirby book. I think this is a great look at Stan Lee. It shows both sides of the man. It doesn't lean one way or the other in terms of being, on his side or against him. Check out the interviews I have with Tom on the channel too, and I also have the Kirby book that I flipped through. Hit up your shop though, pick up the book, like, follow, and subscribe. Hit the bell icon so you're notified every time a new vid drops. And on that note, I'm out.